Hi, this week we're going to look at coming up with a fresh approach for a story. Let's get started. So, how do we come up with a fresh approach? I'm going to look at some movies first, some things that have had fresh approaches to old stories. Let's take Batman as the first example. In Batman movies, we've always had the billionaire Bruce Wayne. He's always been, if we look at Michael Keaton and even back to Adam West, he was always a bit of a dapper billionaire. People idolised the wealthy. He always had parties. He drove nice cars, which all the Batmen have done. But he was always out there, playboy, dinner parties, part of the wealthy society. Then we get to Nolan, Chris Nolan's Batman. If you look at Batman Begins, he turns his back on his wealth. He disappears off into the mountains and comes back. And even when he's back, he pretends to be part of society. He's not really in the in crowd. By the time we get to, I think it's Batman 3, he's locked himself away. People haven't seen him for years. So that is the fresh take on Batman. That their Batman is broken. He has this social issue. He has a problem where he doesn't fit into society. And that makes it easier for him to be the vigilante. We can see that he doesn't fit in. So he doesn't rely on conventional means to make good on things. He goes out and makes things right himself. Where in the other Batmans, sure, his parents were killed, shot, so he's got this thing of vengeance. But that feels not quite as coherent as the Batmans of Chris Nolan, because his fresh approach made it more realistic that a person's going to go out and be a vigilante is going to be a little bit broken. American Werewolf in London. That was a fresh approach of the werewolf film because it was taken with a slightly comedic bent. He knew he was a werewolf. He knew he was doing the wrong thing. He didn't want to continue to do the wrong thing. And his voice of logic, his voice of reason, was his slaughtered friends. And he could still see all his victims and all the dead people that he'd killed. But it was that comedic approach. It was a fish out of water in two ways. He was travelling around Europe and he was becoming a werewolf. It wasn't set in those more... werewolf films have always been an ancient hunger set in small towns where all those sorts of things. This was, let's go to Paris. Let's make it a light-hearted comedy, The American Werewolf in London. So what can we do? I'm going to put an image up here. These are some of the things we can consider when we're going to take a new take on something. So we've got your character. You want to have a new take on a zombie film. You want to have a new take on something. So let's look at the actions the person takes. So how do they treat people? Have the character that we've got is the traditional hero. Do they always treat people well? So maybe the new take could be that they don't treat people well, that they're harder edged. What you don't want to do, I'm going to break from this for one second. What you don't want to do is glue something on. Okay, so I'm going to have the traditional gangster film, but the boss will be a woman. There you go. That's not a new take. That's just changing the gender of a character. There's nothing really fresh about that because they'll stick to all the same cliches and tropes and the ways the stories are told. There's no new thing about it. Okay, back to the diagram. So if we look at how actions, we look at how they act, how they treat people, how they are treated, and how they react to things, that will give you something fresh, some fresh approach, because changing how a person treats other people has a great deal of impact on the entire story. It changes how the story is told. It changes how people interact with this character. If it's a person that's easily is charismatic and people will flock around him and help him. But if he's a horrible person that treats people badly, it's less likely he's going to get people to flock around him and like him. The people that then work with him will probably want something from that relationship, which changes that dynamic, which changes the group, which changes the action, which is the fresh take. Society. Do they have a position of power in a society? Where are they positioned in society? What part of society are they in? I've had an idea for a story, and this is probably not going to be that new or original, and so feel free to write it yourself. Imagine if Batman was poor. What would a poor Batman look like? Still smart, still engineering, still making tools, still doing things, but now he's going to be more of a vigilante, and people aren't going to be so forgiving of him. He won't be able to do the big things, and even if he does do the big things, he's probably going to have to rely on more violence to get things done, like the tower block in Hong Kong. He'd probably have to shoot his way in and shoot his way out. He wouldn't have a sky hook to pick him up. He wouldn't be able to, shoot explosives from a long way and have windows blow out of buildings. He'd be poor. He'd have to rely on poor things, which is fundamental things. So a poor Batman, what would a poor Batman look like? How much power does your character have? If this character is normally a very powerful person, or these sorts of guys are very powerful. So a gangster, he has a lot of power within his organisation, within his group. Suddenly, make him powerless within his group. So there's a lot more negotiation. Maybe he's a wheeler dealer now. So we're not going to see a gangster who rules by threat and violence. We're going to see a gangster who wheels and deals. It might be a bit of a fresh take on the way of doing things. Do they have natural advantages within their society? Or are they from a disadvantaged group? Or are they of a hyper-advantaged group? So Bruce Wayne turning his back on all his money. He's turning back on hyper-advantage. So, that was a new fresh look on it as well. Now, motivation and goals, which are down the bottom here. What motivates this person will also change their goals, and what their goals are will also change their motivations, and these are also impacted back through the other ones. So if they treat people badly, their motivation probably isn't going to be to make life better for people. So we have to look at those interactions. So if they're not really to make life better for people, what are their goals going to be? So if the motivation isn't philanthropic, their goal will probably not have a philanthropic outcome. So if you look at a new goal, so if you look at Sherlock Holmes, I'm making this up now as I go along, as I tend to do in these videos. So if we look at Sherlock Holmes, and rather than solving a crime because he finds it interesting, he may just start to solve crimes for the money. So when he spots a crime, or he knows something to solve, but it's a poor person, he may just let that go. He may turn his back on that person. He may not help that person. He may even put that person in a worse situation to get advantage of a well-paying crime. So that makes Sherlock, rather than being this very smart guy who's fairly moral, it makes him a very smart guy who's highly moral. That could be a fresh take on a Sherlock Holmes. That's some ways of looking at fresh takes. As you see, I've got the Be Original, Hard to Be Heard in a Herd t-shirt on today. There's a link up here, or there's a link down the thing, but you can buy these t-shirts if you like. They're all about originality and writers not being stuck in a herd. For anyone who's been doing these things, thank you very, very much. I've been getting some interesting comments. I actually got a comment the other day, I should have wrote the person's name down, who just said beautiful, but he said it in his own language rather than in English. So I had to translate it. So thank you for that. Thank you that it's beautiful, because it obviously isn't me. I've got a head like a rubber's dog. And until next time, guys, keep writing. Bye.